Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please download future episodes on iTunes. So today I will be talking to Curtis Tappenden, who is an artist, educator, and an amazing socialized maverick. So we're going to be talking about maverick leadership today. Welcome, Curtis.
Hello there, Judith.
I was thinking it'd be interesting to talk today about the attributes of maverick, which are that they have a willful intention, have an honest belief, influential, very knowledgeable in what they do, so real expertise. They are execution and output driven and success driven. Is there any one of those attributes that you'd like to talk about?
Certainly, success driven, I think, is an interesting one. From my point of view, there's a balance here between wanting to be successful, but actually, as a socialized maverick, of wanting to do that with others. And there's a sort of inherent desire to not want to go alone. So I have this sort of, I think it's about being visionary as well. I have this sort of vision of wanting to get somewhere. The interesting thing about that is I'm not quite sure where I'm going, but I know I'm going there. That makes sense. So you set out sort of short-term, medium-term and long-term goals. And the long-term, I'm really not sure where it ends. But in the medium, I have an idea of where I want to be. And I start to think about how I'm going to achieve what I want to do next. I talk mainly about education here, but and who can come on that journey with me. And it's interesting, for my PhD studies, one of my chosen 7 mavericks who I've case studied, who is a senior manager, senior leader in a university, has always used that strategy in her maverickness, if you like, to actually go on her journey, but she will not do it alone. And one of the interesting things for her in her attributes is, because of her position, she wants to be playful, but finds that her hands are tied. So in fact, she picks out people who have similar attributes to her and can play her games at lower levels. And this obviously is not something that people would normally confess to, and certainly not in the boardroom or at senior level. But she confessed it to me because I had an inkling that this was what was going on, because I saw certain people being lined up for certain things. It wasn't nepotism. It was actually choosing people according to their skills and what they actually had to offer. But it was an interesting one to look at. So I think the success thing is interesting. And I think for socialized mavericks, sometimes that success walks hand in hand with other people.
I think that's a really good point, because socialized mavericks really want to collaborate. So when they have a good idea of where they want to be, they do look around to see who can come with them, and how do you bring that person along as well. So I think for extreme mavericks, the success drive is all about them, and they don't care how they get there or who they step over to get to that point. I think it's a bit different for socialized mavericks, which is why they make better leaders and are less.
Yeah.
I think you picked an interesting thing there about influence, the maverick that you were working with. So that influence that she was demonstrating, do you think it was recognised by her senior manager?
I very much doubt it. I do know that in the end, as all good mavericks do, in the end, the things that were being offered to her and given to her and suggested to her were not tenable with her integrity, her vision, and she ended up leaving and moving on. So I don't think it was, and I don't think that she was necessarily willing to disclose that either. It's not that we're here not to be transparent and to hide things, but I do get the feeling sometimes that mavericks move in the gaps. I like to think of myself sometimes as snaking in the gaps, and I don't think a snake is an evil creature here, but recognizing there are areas that you can move into quite silently, and you can slide in and take a position for a while before sort of slithering on, and sort of almost like spying and recceing the area and knowing what to do. And I think she probably was doing some of that. I think she probably had 2 lives, actually, one of saying what needed to be said and working very efficiently at top level, but also working with these lower people and keeping that just a little bit away from other people. I think Mavericks have that because often they gain the respect both at top level and at lower level, and they're in a really interesting gap where they can influence hugely and unleash a whole lot of power, but it doesn't really necessarily get recognized. And in that also there obviously comes an ego thing, because what I think the Maverick needs to realize is they're not going to get necessarily credited for their good works because they may go unseen. So it is a case of them having to accept that in order to fulfill their ambition and what they want to do, it may not actually get credited to them. It will be seen. It may get credited later on or when the opportunity appropriates itself, but certainly in the actions and in the undoing of whatever it is they're intending to do, I think it's probably a separate thing and a secret thing. And I think that particular leader was operating with the unseen, although obviously those below were getting a huge amount of fulfillment from what she was doing.
Yeah, because I think Mavericks are very much, especially socialized ones, are very much the king makers rather than the king, because they realise that they can do that snaking, like you were saying. They can have much more influence by not being the one that people are noticing. And I think that their influence tends to happen, or people recognise the influence when they've gone and they suddenly realise things aren't happening.
Yeah.
And it's at that point that they suddenly think, they actually were very, very good at what they do.
Yeah. Well, hindsight's a great thing.
So, what do you think about willful intentions? I know we've spoken before and you've talked about your willfulness. How has that helped you?
It's helped me a great deal. I've always been willful. I think here we go back to in my PhD, I look at the work of Pierre Bourdieu, who looks at habitus and capital and looks at where we come from and how that determines what we do. And I think I was probably born with an element of it because I recognise it in my own father, who was in his day a serving police officer and managed 8,000 men and women. He was a commander. He ended up as a commander in the police. And he was very willful. And he still is. He's sort of retired now and he actually works as a Toastmaster. But he's still willful, and he engineers that with a sense of great independence as well. So I think the willfulness goes hand in hand with actually doing what you want when you want to do it. Not disobeying the law, but just moving, treading around aspects, trying to make it suit yourself. And I think I recognise in myself those similar attributes of wanting to get something done. And wanting to, for example, if someone is stalling and not getting it done and it needs to be done, I'll find a way of getting it done. I'll move gently around them and co-opt other people to help me or try and work something out so that we can get things done. There's nothing worse than not getting things done when they need to. So there is always, I think, something in me that drives. Where the drive comes from, whether that is innate, whether that is a genetic thing, or whether that partly comes from background, I'm not quite sure, because there was no reason for me to have to keep hurrying as a child or even seeing that things were not getting done around me. My mum was very efficient with the hoovering. She kept a tidy house. Everything's always been good around me. So it's not like I'm the one that's sort of stropping in the house wondering why everything's falling around me, because everything was very efficient and very tight. Willfulness, I think, is important. I think you need to have the drive to succeed in what you are planning or setting out to do, what you're scheming. And without that, I'm not sure I would have got where I have got. And this is interesting because I often look at students. I'm not saying I'm looking for mavericks, but students that turn up within the first 2 or 3 days, you can pretty well tell who is probably going to succeed because they begin to unleash and very gently unleash their willfulness and their intent, where they want to be and how they want to achieve that. And it's always matched with results. This is the thing. People that talk and bluster about things and don't get things done, I don't think you recognise the willfulness there, but it is always matched by action. You see the fruit of what someone is intending fairly quickly. It begins to put itself out there and people recognise it. And I think Mavericks are good at that. They make themselves known. They're seen in their actions. Even if it's, as I said, relating to the last question, if it's at a lower level, people do see it. Even if they don't credit it, the willfulness is demonstrated proficiently.
Yes, I agree. And I think what's interesting is that you touched on another driver, which is the execution and output driven.
Yeah.
And I think that is innate, and I think that's probably one of the differences, because with Mavericks, they sit there and wonder, what is the point of something if you're not going to get it done?
Yeah. But everything's got to have meaning.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. But it's good in a way. My job is unusual because I'm not sitting 9 to 5. I don't have a desk job, and I'm not working in a team that's being necessarily driven by targets as some people's work. If I'm working as a freelance artist and writer, I'm very much setting my own targets and working to those. And I think also the art and design sector, being an artist or a designer, you're very much able to drive your intentions without being hindered by anyone on the way. Very often you set things up which are creative, and sometimes they're not destined to fail, but you're not sure where they're going to go. But you need to go and do those anyway. I find there's a need. But that's the other thing. I don't think it's a Maverick thing. I think creative people have a need to be creative. We're all creative anyway. No one can actually live on the planet without being creative. But those that put it to put it to sort of designing and innovating particular things, whether it's objects or paintings or prints or whatever. And I think there's just something in creative people. It's like a form of madness. They have to do it. It's something that is an obsession, and I have noticed in Mavericks there are certain obsessive qualities, but I wouldn't say that all people with obsessive qualities are necessarily Maverick. And I think there is a distinction between those who definitely are playing, on the margins with their Maverickness, and those who are obsessive.
Yes, because I think all Mavericks will have those 6 attributes, and then you'll have Maverick behaviourists who will borrow some of the behaviours of a Maverick in their area of success. So whether that's going to be at work or in a sport, I think that's what you make different, is that whenever somebody says to a Maverick, can you do this? Their first question, whether they articulate it or not, is why? Why should I do this? And you're laughing because you recognise it, don't you? And it's not necessarily because you're being deliberately challenging, but there's that why has so much in it that needs to be unpacked, isn't it? It's like,
well, it's a big investment.
Part of it is exactly. Part of it is what's the point, or why is there a change required? Are you manipulating me? Is it worth my time and effort? There's so many things in that why, but it's not said in a way that it's not meant in an aggressive way. It's kind of, because as you know, Mavericks will only do something if there is a compelling need for them to do it. If there's a compelling need to change, then they'll do it. So when they ask that why, it's like, well, is it compelling enough for me to get up and do it?
I think the challenge comes when you have to have foresight and vision is another thing that I think goes hand in hand with willful intent. For example, there is something I know about at the moment where there's a new boss in a particular university who is wanting to drive new strategic objectives, and some of it looks rather meaningless on paper. It's using some very, I'd say, neoliberal words, which need to be actually described in the context before actually having any meaning, and at the moment they're not. And there are certain things attached to that which are needing to be done, and people are having to sign up to that ahead of the game, if you like. So I think the Maverick now has to caution with wisdom, a little bit of foresight and wisdom as to whether to do some of the things being asked, because they know that that's their way in order to influence things that will come later. And I think sometimes that is very necessary. So it may be a case of questioning it, but actually agreeing to do it, even though you don't know what you're agreeing to do, in the knowledge that you will be able to influence something later on. Now, that could all go very wrong. And in fact, you might be signing up to something that starts to trap or ensnare. But I think the Maverick has to think differently and think, I will sign up to this, I will agree to this, but then I'll see how I can turn it or move within it and look to sort of negotiate further down the line the things that I want out of it, or the things that are, in case of education, beneficial to students and good learning.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think the Maverick will think of the intention of the person that's asking as well, and they'll say whether they're trustworthy. They'll follow somebody to do something that's very difficult if they believe the person believes it's the right thing. But if they think that the person is doing it for some nefarious reasons, then they're unlikely to want to follow. Mm. One of the other attributes is having an honest belief. And I say that Mavericks only do things if they honestly believe it's something that needs to be done, the right thing to do. And that can often mean they could end up losing their job if it hits a principal.
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced that yourself or seen other people refuse to do something?
I haven't, but it may be because of the areas I work in. I haven't actually seen it in newspapers either, not from my perspective of where I work, but certainly in education, I haven't seen it because we've obviously had very good leaders who haven't challenged people in that way. It hasn't directly affected me, no. If it did, I think I would have to go if I was sort of challenged ethically or morally on something I didn't agree with, and I truly didn't agree with it. But of course, we have bargaining power with, for example, in education, you could join a union, and the union would certainly do that side of it for you and try to bring a good outcome. Where unions, certainly in the public sector, do still hold a fair amount of sway. They can challenge the law on aspects when perhaps bosses are pushing very finely to the line of the law. So I haven't actually had that. But if it occurred, yeah, of course, I wouldn't. I'm of an age now where I think this does happen when you get sort of up to your middling years. That actually, if you are secure in yourself, which Mavericks are, you actually don't really care. You do care. You care a lot. You care not to care. So you are willing to put those things on the line, which is probably the opposite of most people that would want to feel secure in their middle years. But I think feeling secure is to know that you could walk away and certainly reposition yourself, probably with success based on the experience and knowledge that your journey has taken you. So if challenged, yeah, definitely move on, move away. There's no doubt about that, because one of my motivations is included in, I suppose, what we'd call social justice. I hate injustice. And if I saw something that wasn't right, then I would definitely move against it or move away from it. I wouldn't take it on like taking on the bull with the horns, but I would certainly stop and think and wonder where I need to be positioned.
Yeah, and I think that it's important that companies allow all their employees to be able to stand on their conscience. And I think that if they did that, companies would be far stronger.
Yes.
You know, if you can have an employee that turns around and says, this is the wrong thing to do, what we really need to do is X, Y, Z. And I just think that the company would be more successful. People would buy their products more. People would, buy into a company that's ethical. And I think sometimes when people talk about ethics in companies, they see it as a really soft and fluffy thing, when it's not really.
No.
It's a good business driver, and it does mean ultimate success for the organisation, especially.
Well, I think you see that. I mean, you don't want a company that is, built on something, on a culture of fear. And I quite like the companies such as, I'm sure I'm allowed to say it, like John Lewis, where where all employees buy into a share of that company and they feel they have some ownership of that company, and therefore they're willing to put the time and effort in, and it makes a successful company. I think that's a great thing. It's definitely a good model. So we've moved slightly aside of Maverick things, but that is definitely something that is always in my mind, the idea that we can have a share. I talked about it with you when I talked about the PhD, doing PhD, but the democratization of authority and offering autonomy to people who are willing to work together, I think is so important.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And I totally agree with you. I think this is a great time to end this podcast. So thank you very much, Curtis, for coming along and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, Judith.
I am pretty sure that there will be many, many more times that you will come on and help.
Yeah, it'd be good.
Lovely
to have further conversations. Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Curtis as much as I enjoyed having it. If you would like to learn more about Mavericks and leadership, then please subscribe to the show on iTunes. Find out how willful independence can ultimately change all our futures. Thanks again, and see you soon. Bye.